and it is June the 3rd. And my guest is the person with whom viewers probably are very familiar, Ross Mitchell from MHIRJ. Hi, Ross. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Addison. Thanks for having me on.
Always delightful to have you on. We don't do it as often as we used to. You know, in your previous life, there was much more stuff to go on, but we're back on the regional airline business again. The reason I wanted to talk with you today is the CRJ550.
Mm-hmm.
Delta is now going to fly that airplane. Up to now, there's been United, and then the program seemed to stall, and now it looks like it's accelerating. Can you help us get the backstory here and what this means?
Yeah, I think it's certainly an acknowledgement that there are many routes that are 50-seat routes and require a 50-seat solution. You know, there's a lot of people out there who want to tell you that 50-seat routes don't exist, natural 50-seat routes don't exist, but they do. There's still a lot of CRJ200s and Embraer 145s that are in service that will require replacement by a 50-seat airplane. And what the CRJ550 does is it allows you to replace it with a true 50-seat airplane that fits under the small RJ scope clause, but allows you as well to introduce premium traffic to a premium product on those routes. So it's really solving a couple of problems there, and it helps the airlines continue to maintain service on what are traditional 50-seat routes.
So the interesting thing about that is if you look at Delta and they have what was the C Series 100, now the A220-100, which is also capable of flying in what generally would be thicker regional routes.
Yeah.
And you can cherry pick those, and you also have a premium product up front. So this seems to be for Delta a way to channel that same product quality further down, right?
Yeah, I think what the 550 allows you to do is it allows you to match or exceed your narrow body product. And it allows you to make sure when you're getting a high value passenger who's connecting on to a wide body aircraft, that you provide them with a true premium experience before they get onto that connecting traffic. So it really does ensure that you're putting premium traffic onto a premium product in those regional markets.
That clearly, if one considers how far some of these regional flights are becoming, how many, you know, it's no longer 300 miles. It seems to be growing. It's nice to have that premium product.
Yeah, certainly. And the airplane certainly solves some of the problems that you had on the older 50-seat aircraft. It has more space for business class. It has more space for luggage. It has more space for amenities. So it really is an experience that exceeds what you would have had on older 50-seat aircraft in the past.
One thing that fascinates me is when we look at the history of the CRJ line.
Mm-hmm.
The 200, obviously, the lion's share of the business, and then the 900 really accelerated the line, and the 700 kind of got lost in the middle somewhere. And this is like the 700's vengeance.
Yeah, I mean the 700, we produced them heavily in the early 2000s when it was the airplane that was the larger of the regional jets. And when the 900 came along, it took a little while to get going. But once it got going and the scope allowed the 76-seat airplanes, the 900 really became preferred because it had a better seat cost than a 70-seat airplane. However, when you're looking at these, 50-seat markets, the 700 as a 50-seater performs very well, and because you add that premium in, it makes it profitable on those 50-seat routes.
It's interesting when we talk about the premium seating because when we look at some of the data in terms of cost per ASM, the CRJ550 is not a cheap airplane to operate.
Sure.
Because you're doing you 50 seats on a 70 seat, it doesn't make sense until you turn it around and look at that revenue potential.
Yeah, it's really the revenue potential. But if you think about it, the next thing that you would operate instead of a 550 would be a 76-seat airplane. And if you think about an Embraer 175, for example, well, it has significantly more cost associated with it than a CRJ700. And if you can't fill the seats anyways, it doesn't matter that you have the seats if you can't fill them.
Right. Well, the other things that flow from having this conversation with you about this segment, the regional segment, which we have discussed now probably for 10 years, you and I. Let's start off with the thing about pilot shortage. Is there one? Has it gone away? Is it getting better? Where do you see that?
So, I mean, for sure, there was and is, in my view, a pilot shortage. It still continues to exist, and it was exacerbated by some of the things that happened during COVID. And it's got a little bit better in recent months. And the reason it's got better, we're told, is largely because some of the mainline airplanes, the narrow body aircraft, aren't being delivered at the same rate, because one manufacturer has a problem with its airframe, the other manufacturer has a problem with one of its engine solutions, and therefore they can't deliver airplanes at the same rate, or they're not in service with quite the same reliability. And because of that, the hiring of pilots may have slowed down at the mainline as well. We've seen airlines like Spirit have sort of slowed down their hiring process as well. So that's allowed the regionals a bit of breathing room. So they're in better shape. They've returned more airplanes to service. But it doesn't mean it's gone away, because some of the fundamental issues at the heart of the pilot shortage are still there. You still have the 1,500-hour rule and all that means for the complications of getting your pilot's license and getting to the point where you're able to fly for a Part 121 carrier. You still have the expense of the initial training. So all of those fundamental market issues are still there. I just say today there's been a slight easing because of some of these other changes in the market.
Then the follow-on to that naturally has to be scope clause, our favorite. Yeah. What do you think is going to happen with this? The pilots have, I mean, I've heard pilots describe this is religion to us. We're never letting go. And of course, when we had the height of the pilot shortage, pilots had insurmountable power in negotiations. I don't know how long that lasts. We know that some of the OEMs are already developing ideas around a next generation single pilot flight deck, much to the annoyance of many people in the industry. How do you see this playing out? How have your views changed is probably a better way of putting it.
Well, how my views have changed is they haven't. So I think, you know, Addison, I've been saying scope won't change. Some manufacturers thought it would and built airplanes that were too heavy for the North American market. And I continue to think it won't change. And it's largely because of what you said. I mean, I think the pilots' unions continue to have some leverage in their discussions, and therefore they won't give up on this particular issue. Absent some major dislocation, I think scope probably stays the same. And you need to think about any future product that's developed outside of scope is making a mistake. We've seen that before. If you develop your product outside of scope, hoping scope will change, you're only getting yourself into a problem down the road. So I don't think it will. That's why the CRJ700, 550, 900 play such an integral role and will continue to do so, because they offer you something that's scope compliant. They offer you something that has the right economics. And, you know, to be honest, there's nothing coming that's going to replace those airplanes. It's partly a function of scope. It's partly a function of economics. You know, most of the CRJ700, 900s are only coming up to the midlife at this point. So they have another 20, 25 years to go in service. So there's a lot of life left in those airplanes. And why are you going to push on scope if you've got a perfectly acceptable solution that will last you for more than 2 decades? Why does any party necessarily want to change that particular situation today? Because in a negotiation, if you get one thing, you give something up. And today, I think most folks are happy with where scope clause is, so I don't necessarily see it changing.
Okay, so that speaks to the North American situation. There's news that Indigo in India is looking to buy up to 100 potentially regional airplanes. the latest chatter I heard this morning was that the ATR turboprop is in with an advantage there. My sense of that is that turboprops are difficult, and particularly the ATR, because it doesn't have the speed to run it network. In other words, it can't match network speed. It's always been that situation. The Dash 8 less of a problem, but the Dash 8, I don't know if that's still a business. So if you look outside of the grasp, I think that's the right word for it, outside the grasp of scope clause, we look at a market like India, where there is rapid growth in aviation. What does one look, and you said there's nothing coming, Embraer is not coming up with anything different.
No.
You guys are not going to make anything different. And I don't know if you have any secret plans that you might share with me.
None, Addison.
No?
No,
Nothing?
I don't have any secret plans for you today.
What would be, what does one do in a market like India? Does a 50-seater airplane that no longer works here go there? How do you see that working out? Russia was supposed to be the great future for the CRJ200.
Yeah. I mean, you could definitely take 50-seat airplanes from here to there. The advantage that a 50-seat airplane, whether it be a 145 or a 200, is that you could have it cheap. And so, ownership costs can make up for a lot of fuel burn and a lot of pilot costs. And so you could see 50-seat airplanes migrating there, depending on the regulations, because some countries won't accept older aircraft into commercial service. So it would really depend on the regulations in India and how flexible they are. When you look at turboprops versus regional jets, certainly places outside of North America are more accepting for turboprops. It doesn't face the same sort of aversion that you might get from the passengers in North America. But you are right. The issue when you have a turboprop versus a jet is if you've got a well-defined network structure, the turboprop doesn't fit into it. So you can't do the sorts of things that you can do with a regional jet. You can fly a 737 in the morning and a regional jet at noon when maybe you don't have the traffic, and then back to a narrow body in the afternoon. You can't do that with an ATR because you have to change the block times, and you don't necessarily want to do that because you're hitting banks at the airports and all of that sort of thing. And so it does make it difficult. As a simple regional that goes out and back and doesn't mix with the narrow bodies, it can do the job. So it really depends on what the airline's needs are. In India, I'm going to expect that it's mostly going to be network traffic, and so it will be challenging for turboprops to mix in the network if they're going to try to use them that way. But turboprops have a role. They can definitely provide regional feed at a cheaper cost than many other solutions. So there's always going to be room for turboprops. It's just a question of how many. And India is an interesting market because it's got such a large population base that as that country gets richer, you'd expect they'd be able to fill, perhaps larger airplanes than even an ATR 72 on their regional routes.
Right. I think the same challenge really applies in Brazil, where you've got geographical, the geographical size is so big.
Yeah.
And the rail and the road transportation is just not adequate. People can't move fast enough. That aviation is the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. When you've got large geographies with poor transportation infrastructure where there isn't a suitable alternative to air, you're going to find that a regional jet excels because it can fly the short route, but it can also go much longer. Turboprops tend to max out at 400 nautical miles or so. It really depends on how long the passenger is willing to sit on the airplane, but the one thing that's very true is a regional jet will always be able to go out much further. And so if you want that flexibility in a large geography, then the regional jet's just going to make more sense. That's same as in India, same as in Brazil, same as in North America.
I was speaking to somebody in India on Friday on a podcast similar to this, and he made a very interesting statement. He said that the way things are changing in India, because of aviation, people can now fly from home in the morning, go to a meeting somewhere, and come back the same day and have literally family time, which they've never been able to do before. He said this is creating a whole new potential in terms of the travel options that somebody can do for business. And this is where we talk about literally the maturing of that market. And what we've seen in India is that the size of the loads are now over 160, which means that a narrow body like a 320 or a 737 is no longer enough. You need to go to that 321 or that MAX 9 and down the road the MAX 10. That is another sign of the maturing of the market. Last question for you, Ross. Your crystal ball on regional flying. The RAA is always trying to say how important regional flying is, but the numbers just look awful in terms of this pressure these airlines are under. How do you see this market sort of playing out in the next 5 years? 10 years might be too far.
I think, part of the issue you might be seeing in the shorter term numbers is as a result of the pilot shortage. And I think as that eases a little bit, you'll see a recovery in the regional space. My view is there are just some routes and some places that are always going to be regional routes. They won't graduate up. They just will be regional routes. And because of the geography of North America, you're always going to have a need for regional aircraft. And the majority of airports in the United States are served by regional aircraft. And so, certainly trunk routes, large routes, mainline routes, you can serve with narrow body airplanes, but most of the United States relies on regional feed and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. And so I think there's still a long future for regional aircraft. And, our CRJs will certainly be a part of that for decades to come. So I could say beyond 5 years, I think you'll still see a similar landscape with our aircraft out there serving the smaller communities in the United States.
I can't help myself. Just one more.
Okay.
And how about those 300 plus communities that have lost air service altogether?
Well, I mean, that's definitely unfortunate. And some of that is as a result of the pilot shortage. And it would be great if those communities could get that service back. It will require some concerted effort on the part of industry and government to come up with solutions to get regional service back into those markets. Because when a small community loses regional service, it has an impact on their economics, right? Their economy, their growth is at stake when they lose that connectivity to the rest of the United States. So for the communities that have lost the service, it's devastating. And the tools are there. We know how to connect those places. It's just the will from policymakers to make sure that happens.
And the economics, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the economics are, you can make it work, right? As I said before, a no ownership cost 50-seat regional jet is still a good solution. It's really just, do you have the people up front to fly it? Do you have the workforce to maintain it? Those are the big issues that the industry faces, and it needs a cooperative effort between the industry and government to make it happen. Just look, we are involved in a technician shortage at the moment. We talk a lot about the pilot shortage, but the technician shortage is equally as pressing. And we need to be focused on the education of technicians, putting technicians into the workforce to continue flying those airplanes. The communities that will suffer if there's a shortage of pilots or technicians will be smaller communities. And it's not fair, but that's what happens.
Ross, thank you so much. Always appreciate talking to you.
Thank you, Addison. It's always great to be on your podcast.